Hey everyone, and welcome to the Right Stuff session. My name is Kelly Juntunen, and today we're going to be talking about beginning writing. So today we're going to cover caption writing, story writing, and headline writing. This is a lot to cover in a very short amount of time, but hopefully it will get those basics covered and help you hit the ground running with your staff. So the first thing that we're going to talk about are storytelling quotes. If you did not have a chance to see my session on the art of the interview, I would recommend reviewing that one because gathering good quotes really makes a huge difference in the quality of our writing. So with our students, we like to encourage them to get a quotable quote. And I like to call this the sparkly quote with my students. And a sparkly quote or quotable quote is only the person who said it could have said it. So it is something that is uniquely them. It makes that caption or that story so much more interesting to have quotable quotes and sparkly things that rise out, just because it makes it more interesting, it makes it more alive. So we want to encourage our students to find those stories. We want to ask those questions. You guys are probably all familiar with Humans of New York, and he is really great about asking questions. And this is one of those things that our kids have to practice, asking questions so that we can get those sparkly quotes. So not stopping with the first answer, asking follow-up questions, and just getting deeper and deeper until you get to the root of what is this person's story? What can I take away from this? Humans of New York is really popular. You have probably seen lots of examples in yearbooks about humans of whatever town you're in, but this is a really great way to pull those quotable quotes. These are really fun. You guys will have access to all of these slides when we're done. So if I'm going too fast, go back and review them, star the time on where I'm at, and that way you can go back and pull those up. Okay, so let's talk about caption writing. So if we have these quotable quotes, we have great things to work with. It makes everything else that we do so much easier. So we're going to talk about caption writing. Caption writing are very short. Captions are short, but they're also really well read. They are the most read copy in a yearbook. So if someone is going to stop and actually read copy in the book, it's really not the story that they're looking at, it's the captions. And so that is something we want to emphasize to our students, that you need to take care with captions and you need to write them as well and with as much intention as a body story, because they're really well read. So what does a caption do? It helps us know more about that picture that we're looking at. It helps tell us the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We're going to go through a little bit of basic captions right now. So basic captions identify people up to 5. So if there's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 people in the picture, you're going to say all their names. If there are 6 people or more, then you could just call them by a group name, like the sophomores or the varsity cheerleaders. But if there is 1 through 5, we need to say first and last name. And then we're also going to tell what's happening in the picture in the present tense. So we act like it is happening at that moment. Basic captions are used when you don't have a ton of space or you have a lot of pictures. So we want to do some research while we're taking pictures. Photographers need to also be reporters because they are going to collect that who, what, when, where, why, how. They can ask questions. Photographers sometimes get nervous and they're the person behind the camera, and so they just take the pictures and they give it to someone else and they'll figure out that word stuff. But we need photographers to really be involved in this process. And I would recommend that your photographers write the captions. They were at the event. They should have talked to people there. They know the atmosphere. They know so many great details. And so let them write the captions. Here's an example of some A basic caption: sophomore Riley Marks tapes paper over a light in the football team's locker room on September 10th. It's a very simple, very straightforward. Notice it's in the present tense. We act like it is happening right this second. More examples. I'm going to go ahead and go through these because we have a lot to talk about. But these are really good examples for your kids to see. Simple caption, basic caption. So one way that you can present caption writing to your students is the ABC method. So we just talked about the B, basic information, written in present tense. So that's just that sentence that shows what's going on in the picture. Before that, you can have what we call an action lead-in. So that would be your A. And that's a mini headline. And these are really fun to write. Sometimes with a really big book, my kids would just like feel like their brain was exploding. But this is a great way to catch a reader's attention. It's a way to be clever, and it's just a mini headline that leads into your caption. And then the last part, C, complementary information. This is additional information. It's written in the past tense, and we'll go over a couple of examples of what complementary information would be. Sometimes people will use complementary information as a way to add another fact or another piece of just straight sentence. Or you could also do a quote from someone about the topic. So complementary could be quote, or it could be sentence. If you do a sentence, it has to be in past tense. And this is what gets kids kind of confused sometimes, is that that first sentence of a caption is in present tense. It's what's happening in the picture right then. And then complementary information is in the past tense. So we have two tenses happening in a caption. If you need some supplemental work for your kids, or want to have a checklist or have them practice this, your yearbook playbook has tons of samples for you guys to go through. So there's even ways to vary your sentence structure, like how to start your captions so that they are different. So this is really helpful as well. There's our action lead-in, there's our basic information and complementary information. Okay, so an expanded caption is where we go beyond that first sentence. It's where we talk about something that maybe isn't visible in the picture. It's something that you wouldn't know by looking at the picture. So the way that we find out that stuff is that we have to talk to people. We have to ask them questions. We want to ask them how something happened or why something happened. So if that first sentence is really fairly simple, it's what we see in the picture, but maybe it written in a little bit more comprehensive way than just what I see in the picture. This second sentence is going to add so much more depth to what we're presenting. So adding a quote is really helpful because it is adding that storytelling element. By putting in a quote and adding that quotable element, we're really making that caption come alive. And so here's some examples of an expanded caption with a quote. You can read these, but you can see the setup. Like we've got all of the students. Hey, notice there are five people in this photograph, so we said all of their names. We got a lot of detail in here, the 5 W's and the H. And then we ended with a quote. So we also want to make sure that we vary the types of captions in the book. There's a lot of different styles. I mean, we've got the basic that we've just covered. You've got an extended, which is adding in another sentence or quote or both. Sometimes you only have space for one little identification caption. Maybe you only have space to say their first name, last name, and their grade. And that's okay. Depending on your design, as long as we get them ID'd, that might be sufficient. And the most popular, most common that you know of identification captions are the mugshots. Those have a caption, it's just the names. And that's perfect. I mean, that's an example of a caption. Okay, so when we are talking about just identification, we say that we identify up to 5. After 5, we call it by the group name. And then we want to say first and last name. And if appropriate, we could talk about what grade they're in, or if it's pertinent to the picture, you could talk about what their position is or their office for whatever club or group. Here's some examples of identification captions. So because we just have this as a photo collage, really it's not necessary to have a basic caption or extended caption for every single photo. Instead, we're gonna just say their name and what grade they're in. Here's another example. So with group photos, you want to identify the group. So say what group name it is, club, organization, sport. And then we start from the front row and work left to right. And we want to label these rows as front row, and then however many rows are in between. So second, third, fourth, however many you have, and then end with back row. And by saying front row as opposed to first row, we really make it clear that we're talking about what is closest to us. If we say first row, people might start at the top and then work their way down, or they might start at the bottom and work their way up. And so this eliminates any kind of question about that. If people have a special title like a club officer, you can put those in parentheses. And then here's an example off to the right. And here this is in real life, front row, back row. It makes it a lot easier instead of having to figure out, are we talking about first row at the back or first row in the front? No, we're talking about front row. It is the thing closest to us. Other thing that I want to emphasize is that as you're writing captions, we want to make sure that every photo has a photo credit. You do not want to take that away from your photographers. This is their work. We want to make sure that they get credit for it. And however you design your photo credits, just be consistent throughout your book. Sometimes people put photo credits in the caption, like they put it as the last line, like this example. Sometimes they put it to the right side of the picture. Sometimes they put it to the bottom of the picture. One pro tip I will give you is that I would highly recommend putting the full name of your photographer. We'll see sometimes people try to be creative or cutesy, and like I've seen people try to do like a little, like a logo or like a little graphic or something that represents each particular photographer, and then you have to like look in the index to figure out, okay, well the party hat is Justin, and that's a lot of work. The other thing, one, that's a lot of work. The other thing is that too, when you submit your book for contest, one of the words that you can get are, you know, very great photos. You will get recognized for quality photography. And so if the judges can't tell who took the picture, then you might miss out on an award. So give every photo a photo credit that is clear and easy to tell who it is, so that your kids can get recognized for their great photos in your book. Okay, so some tips. We don't editorialize, that's putting in our opinion. Here's some common examples of ways that captions get editorialized. And then we also want to avoid cliches and trite wording. The other thing that we'll see a lot in captions that we want to avoid are poses with, or stands next to, or just things that make you go, well, duh, I could see that. So make it substantial information. So add something valuable. Don't just put words for the sake of words. With sports, we have a little bit more that we can add in. We like to say what the play's outcome is. If there's like something exciting that we have a picture of at the home plate, and there's like someone in the dirt and someone with their glove on their head, like, did they get them out? Like, that would be good to know. So we like to say the play's outcome if we know what it is. And then sometimes it's really helpful to have uniforms or jersey numbers so that we can differentiate people. Secondary information, so if you're trying to do an extended caption, you want to add more details. You could put stats about the team, you could talk about the player, you could talk about previous games. Those are all really good complementary information. Balfour has a really great square that you can get, and it's ways to vary your caption leads. Because kids are writing captions over and over and over throughout the whole book, sometimes they get stuck in a rut. And so we want to give them options for how to present their captions. Okay, so that's it for captions. Let's quickly pivot to headlines. So I love headlines. I used to be a copy editor at a newspaper. So besides finding all the errors in stories, I got to write all the headlines from the stories. And so headlines are awesome. I love headlines. And headlines are one of the most read parts of the book. I would say that captions are pretty popular just because kids like to look at pictures and then they read the caption. Headlines are right up there. Body copy is the least read copy in the book, and that's why you might consider looking at some alternative copy styles. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So when we talk about how headlines are set up, generally yearbook uses a primary headline and a secondary headline. And the primary headline is what we call the teaser. This is what we're saying to a reader to really pique their interest, to make them interested in reading the story. And then the secondary headline is the teller. And that's really kind of the newsy part. This is where it's telling specifically what the story is about. So the teaser is creative and clever and fun. And then the teller is, here's the basics, here's the facts about the story. So here's a good example. We've been using this one at Balfour for a long time because it's really good. But the teaser is rain delay. And you'll notice that rain is like rain if you were a king or a queen. But it's a play on words because rain delay, like it is raining outside and there is a delay. So this is a very clever teaser, and you say, what does this mean, rain delay? And then you read your secondary headline and it tells you what the story is about. The game, field coronation, come to a thundering halt. Oh, okay, so now I know what the story is about. So I've been teased, my interest has been piqued, and then now I know what the story is about through the teller. At the top, we've got homecoming underlined. If you are just telling the topic of a story, that's called a label. You can't just have a label by itself. You can use a label with your primary and secondary headlines, but you can't just say like homecoming and then have your story. Like you need something to draw in the reader, and that's what we use the teaser and the teller for. So have we identified what this is about? Yeah. Does this tell us something specific about the event? Definitely. It rained out. It was kind of a big deal. And then does it capture the reader's attention? Yeah, this is very clever. It's a play on words. I think people who are into puns will think that it's really fun. Then you'll notice that here's some other examples. Around the world in 79 days. Well, the teaser, that's kind of cool. That's a play on something that we're very familiar with. The teller, verbally or venturing globally, travelers use summer to experience different cultures with family and friends. So now we know exactly what the story is about. So our interest was piqued with that teaser, and now we've been told exactly what it's like. We also can use some really cool things from our theme to reinforce the theme in our headlines. And so I'm not going to talk about headline design just because we don't have that much time, but theme packaging needs to carry into your headlines as well. So the fonts that you use, the colors that you use, the ways that you set up your word packaging, that all needs to tie together so that your theme carries throughout your book. The other thing that we really want to do with our headlines is connect to the photo. And this is what we call a visual verbal connection. Visually, what we see in the picture, and verbally, what we read in the headline, there is a connection. So this headline, stay in motion. Notice that all of these pictures have motion, and also the background has motion. There is a visual verbal connection here. Chant of champions. Those words, chant, and what they're visually doing in the picture match. Leap of faith. So this is like sparkles for your brain when you have a visual verbal connection. Our brains love that. And so we want kids to make that connection as well. So ways that you can play with headlines, use as many clever word plays as you can think of, alliteration, rhymes, puns. This is where your clever kids are just like gonna be so happy. You wanna give them as much opportunity to be creative as possible, and you will have some kids who are just like naturally good at this. And so this is really fun to watch this happen. Here's other examples of that rain delay. Say we wanted to use alliteration about that. So maybe we did wet, wild, washout. You could have rhyme, onomatopoeia, homonyms, puns, get a rain check. Some of these might go over kids' heads and it's more amusing for adults. So make sure that kids understand the literary devices that are being used. Here's some fun examples. There's an oxymoron for you. Onomatopoeia. A pun. Don't need to pay. Donut need to pay. Praise the roof. Play on words. Pun. Once you start looking for these, you'll find them all over the place. So just build yourself up a little collection, or you can have kids look for them in books and share them with each other. Create a little sample book of good headlines. I could do this all day, but we don't have that much time. So when you are talking about headlines, we want to make sure that it's factual, no editorializing. It is okay to be fun, but we can't have opinions in it. We want to be fresh and active with our verbs. Instead of using the word and, we can use a comma, saves us some space. For quote marks and headlines, you only have to use one quote mark around it instead of two, also saves us some space. Don't use your school name, your initials, your mascot. It is your book, so we should know those things. Also, that saves you some space. And then headlines are in the present tense. Also, headlines, I mean, as much as we just went over rules, break the rules. This is a great opportunity to be creative, to look at things outside of the box. Look for things in magazines that your kids might like, and then make it work for you. Okay, last thing that we're going to talk about. I'm checking my time. 22. Oh, we're doing good. Okay, so story organization and transitions. So this is probably the least read part of the book, and so you will see that there are some other sessions on alternative copy and magazine style copy, and I think that as the years go on, it seems like kids like to write alternative copy more, but I'm going to show you how to write just a basic story and follow the story organization so that you have those, especially for longer detailed topics that you want to cover in your book. You're going to need a plain story. So most of us, if you have a journalism background, are familiar with the inverted pyramid. Usually this is used for a news story. In the old days, you would start with the most important stuff, end with the least important stuff, because you never know how much of your story is going to get cut. So if they start from the bottom and cut to make it fit, that would be fine because you've already ordered the most important to the least important. So that stuff that gets cut, it's okay. We still kind of think of that when we're talking about feature writing, but we really do want to emphasize starting with the most important or the most interesting information. So what we do is we have our lead. So that's your first paragraph. That's your most important, most interesting, best thing that you have to share, the coolest thing that you found out during all of your interviews. And then we're going to follow that down with the least important stuff. So the format that we use with news stories is called the LQT format. And it seems like, oh my God, there's all these letters. So I'm not sure if this is how you have been taught, but this is how I've been taught. And my students have really responded to this. So the LQT format is the L stands for your lead. So your first paragraph is your lead. Then you're going to have a quote, then you're going to have a transition. Then you're going to have a quote, and then you're going to have a transition. And so you just keep rotating quote, transition, until you're at the end of your story. And then we end with the kicker. And then the kicker is our ending quote. So it's really a quote again, but we call it a kicker just to differentiate that it is the final one. And when we say quote, we're talking about a direct quote. So, quotation marks around what the person said. So every letter that we say represents a new paragraph. Journalistic writing has tons of paragraphs. We want paragraphs to be short and to the point. So after we do the lead, we're going to have a paragraph break, start a new paragraph. Quote, have a paragraph break, start a new paragraph. So everything is a new paragraph. So when we talk about transitions, so if you have LQT, T stands for transition. Transitions show up between your quotes. What kinds of things could you put in a transition? You could put a fact, an indirect quote, or a partial quote. It is okay to have 2 transition paragraphs in a row. You max out at 2. You can't have more than 2, but you can have 2 transitions in a row. There are 3 types of quotes. So you can have a direct quote, you can have an indirect quote, or you can have a partial quote. Now notice that if we are following our format of LQTQT, what things would be okay to use as a Q and what things could be okay to use as a T. So not all quotes can be used as a direct quote. If you are only using a teeny tiny part of it and it's a partial quote and you're just using it at the end of a regular sentence, you can't use that as a direct quote. If you're doing an indirect quote, you're paraphrasing what someone said, you can't use that as a direct quote either. Those are transition paragraphs. They're good to use. It's just keep in mind our format, LQTQT, until our story's done. So direct quotes are what someone said word for word. Now this is where we want those sparkly, emotional things that people say. This is not where we give factual information. If I say Key Club meets on Thursdays, that's a fact. Like, that is not an interesting quote. There's no emotion, there's nothing sparkly on that. So we want to make sure that the quotes that we choose to use as a direct quote really are worthy of being a direct quote. We want to make sure that those direct quotes are linked to the transition that came before it. It should elaborate on what that transition said. So if our superintendent says that students have these long bus rides and then gives us a quote about, hey, we're going to give free Wi-Fi to them so that they can do some work on the bus, that's an elaboration of that transition. We said a fact, and now we've added in more details with the quote, and it's connected. So things that we don't do with direct quotes. We can't put 2 direct quotes next to each other without a transition. That's called a stacked quote, and it is ugly and it's not okay. You can have 2 transitions, but you can't have 2 quotes. The other thing that we want to make sure that we don't do is we don't want to repeat the transition, and students have a tendency to do this. Superintendent says that many students have long bus rides because of the size of the district, and then the quote says, because of the size of the district. Like, they will say the exact same thing. It has to be different. It needs to be an elaboration. It needs to be more. It can't be just a reiteration of exactly what we've already said. Indirect quotes are when you take what someone said and then you put it in your own words. This is a great way to express facts. So this is taking what someone said, we're taking out the quote marks because it is not word for word anymore. We're translating it in our brain into something different. And so that becomes an indirect quote. Partial quotes are when you only use a word or a phrase of what someone said, and or also to highlight something memorable. There's an example of that right there. Attribution. So attribution is where we say who said that thing. If you have a direct quote, you have to have attribution. The first time that you mention a person, you always say their first name, last name, and their title. So full, everything we know about that person. After that first time, we can just use their last name. Saves us some time and some space. So title, name, attribution verb. We always use the verb said. Now people Well, sometimes students have told me that their English teacher has a lesson called "Said is Dead." And I say that might be okay for English, but with journalistic writing, we really want to remove ourselves from the writing. We don't want to have any emotions or opinions. So in order to keep it very neutral, we just stick with said. Let's see. We end with a period. We place the comma inside the quotation marks. Here's a great example. The fighting is unacceptable and we need a long-term solution, comma, quotation marks. I like to tell my students that the comma, it's just a little baby punctuation mark. And if it's not within the quotation marks, it will fall away. It'll get lost. It's a baby. So it needs these quotation marks to hug it and keep it tight and keep it close. And sometimes that helps them and sometimes it doesn't. If you have split quotes, and so if you have a really great quote and you want to use 2 sentences of the quote, you would put the attribution after the first sentence. Here's an example of that. Indirect quotes can be used in transitions, and you would use said or according to. Partial quotes. This can be used as a transition paragraph. You put periods and commas inside the quotation marks. We don't want to lose any baby punctuation. And so you'll see how that is set up right there as well. You guys are free to take this and use it in your classroom to give examples. You can have your students practice writing partial quotes, like give them a quote and then have them translate that into a partial quote. So the 3 types of transitions that we've said are a fact, an indirect quote, or a partial quote, and we can have 2 transitions in a row. Now, while we're writing these transitions, what are our goals? We want to add some information, we want to explain some more, but we also want the story to flow. Telling a story, it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and end. We want things to go seamlessly from one part to the next. And so transitions are a really great way to help that flow. It keeps our story together and it links our paragraphs. Here's some examples of some different transitions if you need some of these for your students, just to show them the difference between a fact, an indirect quote, a partial quote, and then these would naturally go into a direct quote paragraph. So if you are writing with an indirect quote, you need to follow it with a direct quote from the same person. So if we are talking about someone saying something and we've paraphrased what they said, we really need to give them a chance to say exactly their words, word for word, and with a direct quote after that. Additional tips are that we want to keep our paragraphs short. 60 words is pretty good. We don't like long paragraphs, 2 sentences max, and then we're going to write in the third person. At the very end of your story, so you've gone lead, quote, transition, and you are at the end. We do not want a summary. Kids have this tendency to do a summary conclusion, just like English class, to like sum up their whole story. The best way to end a journalistic yearbook story is to find a really great direct quote from the person who is the main topic of the story that really just naturally sums it up. So this was like the Fast and Furious, let's see what my time is. Fast and Furious writing session. There is so much to talk about with writing. I hope that you guys got a few things out of this to take back to your classroom. As far as writing styles, there's tons of alternative copy styles that you could look at as well. Plus, there's all the different varieties of leads that you could look at for how to start a story. But we have covered caption writing, we have covered headline writing, and we have covered how to write a body copy story. So if you guys want to talk writing or you want clarification about anything that we've gone over today, this was a lot, especially the body copy. That was a lot to take in. And so if you want to review anything, I am happy to chat with you. Stick around and we will talk more about words and help you guys get off on the right foot for getting great content in your book for this year. So stick around if you want to talk more. Thanks.